Hey everybody, welcome back to Mixing Music Analog and mixingmusicanalog.com and here on my YouTube channel. And this week we're going to finish up this mix and I'm going to take you through how I have set up parallel compression on all my different groupings of instruments and how I'm routing that out to the console and using plugins along with it to get some nice extra power and girth and liveliness to the entire mix. But before we get to that, if you like what you see in this video, please consider subscribing. Also hit the notification bell so you know when I'm posting new content. So let's scoot on over here to our DAW and let's take a look at Studio One here and let's talk about parallel compression for a quick second here. So how am I using parallel compression with the console? Well, it's the same kind of philosophy that we were talking about in last week's episode when we talk about how I use reverbs and delays. Basically what happens is I'm creating some parallel compression buses in our DAW, Studio One, and I'm routing each one of those parallel compression tracks out to a stereo pair here on the board on some short faders, and then we're blending it into the rest of the mix. So if we jump on in here to Studio One, you'll see that I have at the end of our console here, we have 7 different bus tracks. We have one for drums called P drums, one for bass called P bass, P acoustic guitars, P acoustic electric guitars, P keyboards, P vocals, P background vocals, P standing for parallel compression. And then what I'm doing on each one of those buses, I'm using a different compressor, which we'll talk about in a second. And then I'm routing my instruments down to these parallel compression tracks via a send. So for example, on the drum parallel compression track, we have all of our drums, all our close mics, kick, snare, hats, toms left and right. Typically, I don't route the overheads to parallel compression because we're overly squashing it and the cymbals tend to get very splashy. I like to just use the direct mics. Those are going over to P drums and pre-fader, 0 dB on the send level to get a healthy signal over to our drums. Then from there, on the P drums, I'm using on this particular session, I'm using an 1176, our all buttons mode, and I'm crushing these things quite a bit. If I were to solo up in here in the DAW, our parallel track here, let me just solo this up. Okay, so we're smashing it pretty good here. And the whole point of this is to really overcompress it, getting really, you know, where everything is really just slamming. And then we're going to blend that in with our regular drums, right? So if we blend those in,
lurking in your skin, let it cut until it bleeds out grace, 'cause everyone feels alone.
okay, so you can see as I solo up all the drums there, sorry, it took an extra second there to solo everything up and then blend in that parallel compression track right here on the DAW. So what I'm doing is I'm blending in with the two faders here that I routed out. So this parallel compression track is routed out to P-Comp1, which is a stereo output on my interface coming out to these two short faders right here. And all of my parallel tracks are being routed to these two faders. So what that means is I can do a blend of parallel compression on all of my parallel compression tracks to get the relationship between the faders, and then I can blend the overall mix right here on the board, okay? Get the idea? Pretty straightforward, okay? So I'm doing the same thing with bass, all the groupings of instruments. Let me just unsolo things here so you can see. So on bass, we're using a DBX 160 just because, why not, by Universal Audio. On acoustic guitar, I'm using the Distressor by Universal Audio. And again, we're hitting it pretty heavily. I mean, we're hitting this heavily. So we're doing like 17 dB of compression. We're over compressing big time, and then we're just blending them in underneath the rest of the tracks, right? That's what we're doing. On the electric guitars, I'm using an LA2A by Universal Audio. On keyboards, we're using an LA3A. On lead vocals, we're using, I believe, a Fairchild. Yep. And then on the background vocals, I believe I'm using, what am I using? Oh, a Universal Audio 176, which is the predecessor to the 1176. So again, over compressing on all the tracks, everything is going to the parallel tracks via the sends pre-fader. And then I'm blending how much I want of each one of them in. And then I'm sending them all out to a stereo pair on the board, right? And then I'm just blending them into taste. And what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to make the track sound much louder. It's just to give it a little more girth, a little more life, a little bit more punch, just like you would in the box, but just bringing it out to the board here. And then the short faders being routed to the master output of the console. So I could turn these on and off so you can hear the effect just by muting all the tracks here. So let's bring this back here and let's start with them in. I'll blend in how much I want on the faders, and then we'll mute the faders in the DAW so you could hear the before and after effect of the parallel compression across all the tracks.
I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Someone tell the mothers to tell the little ones that we're all living.
So I can tell right there that my blend's a little off and that my lead vocal and my background vocal are a little loud. So I'm going to turn those down here in the DAW. Okay, I'm not looking for volume. I'm looking for punch and just get a little more size to it. It's a little more felt thing than heard thing. So the key is getting the blend between all the different groupings of instruments on each one of the parallel tracks and then blending in the overall volume here. Now you could, if you had enough I/O, you can have, instead of having them blended in the DAW, you can have each one of those buses, you can have those brought out to a stereo pair here on the board if I had more I/O, and you could do all the blending here, but we don't have that, so we're just doing it on a stereo pair.
In a sideways place. Oh, please, please resist the violence lurking in your skin. Let it cut until it bleeds out grace. 'Cause everyone feels alone. I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, so the key is getting the blend between in the box and then just feathering in enough here. Again, when I was doing this all in the box and not on the board, it's a little bit different. It feels it's a little different. Just getting that blend perfectly. I felt the same way with the reverbs and delays as I talked about in the last episode. But this is the way you do it. You blend it out on the board. So that's how we're doing it. So that's how it is to set it up. It's pretty straightforward. You just create a bus channel here in the box. Use your sends for the instrument to go to that parallel compression track, and then over compress with the plugin. Route all your parallel compression tracks out to a stereo pair on the board and blend them all in. Now, here's another way that you could do this, because people will say this in the comments and it's absolutely valid, but I want to make sure in case you don't think of it. For example, on the drum bus itself, we're using the West Audio NG bus compressor. Now that has, I'll show it to you here in the DAW, that has on it a wet dry knob, right? So you can over compress, pardon me, on the actual drum bus itself, and then you can dial back the wet dry mix, and you can do the parallel compression with the hardware. You could do that as well if your compressor, your hardware compressor, has a wet dry on it. A lot of the more modern ones do, some of them don't, like the LA2A that we're using on the bass, the Audioscape Opto compressor doesn't. But something like the NG bus compressor, something like the Bluey by Black Lion Audio, all of those have that. The Dione here by West Audio as well has a wet dry mix, so you can do it that way if you want. I'm, at least on this mix, I'm just electing to use the hardware compressors at 100% compress, and then using these parallel tracks with plugins. The other advantage to using plugins for my parallel compression is that I get the flavor, if you will, of these different compressors that I'm using. They all have their own sound characteristic, and that helps blend the overall mix because you're getting a little bit of color from each one of these compressors. Now, even though I'm over compressing and I'm hitting them really hard, how much of it I'm actually using in the mix is very, very little comparing, because I don't want to lose the dynamics of the track. I don't want the parallel compressions to overpower everything else and squash everything. That's not what we're looking to do. We're looking to do this in a more subtle way. So once again, if we kind of play this back, I'll mute the parallel compression tracks as we go so you can hear the accumulative effect.
I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm reaching out for someone. I'm reaching out for you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Again, and then it's totally up to you how much of this you want to blend in. When it really gets a big volume jump, I think that's a little too much. Again, I want to try to just kind of find that nice balance. So that's one way that you can use parallel compression with plugins and use it with your inline console. So I hope you found this video helpful. I want to thank you so much for joining me over these last several weeks, taking a look at this mix and joining me on my first mix here on the SSL Origin. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm learning as I'm going, and I appreciate you guys coming along for the journey. So until the next video, I've been Dave with MixingMusicAnalog.com. Make sure you leave comments below and let me know if there's any other videos that you want to see specifically. We have a whole list of videos we're going to be doing coming up. We're going to be doing more mixing demonstrations, and as I use this more and get more comfortable, more familiar, and learn the little tips and tricks, I'll be sure to pass them along to you. And also just trying out different workflows to see what works, what doesn't work. The only way you learn this stuff is to really, really experiment. The great thing about having outboard in something like a console is there's a lot of possibilities, and really you could do things one of 50 different ways, and there's no right or wrong. There's traditional guidelines, but it's all about experimentation, and if it sounds good, it is good. And I'm learning, and I appreciate you coming along for the ride. So let me know below what you thought of this series, and if you want me to mix another song from start to finish like this one, let me know below. I'd be glad to do it for you. Until the next video, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys really soon. Take care, everybody.